Hi, everybody. I'm Daniel Sommers, and I'm here with,
Laval Martin.
and we are the president and CEO of the Pacificus Group, respectively. And we wanted to get into in our second podcast episode here a little bit more of our backgrounds and how this company came into being, just so that if you're considering working with us, you're interested in what we do, you understand where we're coming from and what we bring to the table. So, to start things off, Laval, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. So let's see. I started off in astrophysics and then ended up switching gears and taking social work. So I did an undergraduate degree and then a master's degree in social work and ended up working in the social service field for a number of years, originally working in some homeless shelters and drop-ins and group homes, working with folks experiencing poverty, homelessness, mental health challenges, addictions, that kind of thing. And ended up going through burnout, which not as much fun as the brochures make it sound. That kind of prompted me to take a new direction in life, and I started providing psychotherapy, specifically dialectical behavior therapy. And also, I do martial arts and self-defense. I studied that for many years as well, and that was in fact how we met.
Mhm. Before we get to me, which is one of my favorite topics of conversation, but before we get to me, your qualification to do psychotherapy, that arose from your licensure with the Ontario College of Social Work, correct?
Correct. Yes.
All right. So you got licensed as a social worker and then you transitioned to provide psychotherapeutic services. It's so important, folks. One of the wonderful aspects of our backgrounds in the management team at Pacificus, we have myself, we have Laval, and we have my father, Dr. Frank Sommers, who's one of Canada's leading psychiatrists. All of us have professional licensed backgrounds, myself in law, my father in medicine, Laval with the College of Social Work. So that's one of the wonderful aspects of our backgrounds. I've been practicing law for a bit over 10 years now, which ostensibly makes me senior counsel in this jurisdiction. So I don't feel old enough to be senior counsel, but apparently that's the official title. And I've been litigating commercial disputes, employment law disputes, labor disputes, and I've been fortunate enough to argue a case before the Supreme Court and assist on some major cases as well. And I've been running my own law firm for almost a decade. So that's my legal background. And then on top of that, I've served for about 6 years in the Army Reserve. So I'm an officer right now with the Office of the Judge Advocate General. I'm going to be, I think, a senior officer soon if I get promoted soon, which looks like it's on the horizon. And yeah, I also have an interest in martial arts and what have you, which is, I remember back in, I think it was 2002,
Mhm.
you and I met on a martial arts class and we hit it right off. So thank you for putting up with me for so long. Frankly, I'm quite impressed. You've lasted longer than most, but maybe that's because you have excellent conflict resolution skills. So in our backgrounds, I think it's very important for people to know how this company came about. And if memory serves, this has been germinating for, even though we launched somewhat recently, this has been germinating for almost 2 years now. When you and I started to have certain discussions about the difficulties you felt some of your patients were having in your psychotherapy practice. Obviously, you didn't mention any names. You were just telling me sort of what the issues were that people were facing, and I was sharing with you some of the issues my clients were facing in the employment law world. And I remember feeling very frustrated when I was talking to you, not because of you, just to be clear, but because of the issues that my clients were facing that resulted in me having to get involved as counsel and to try to litigate these issues. And I remember thinking at the time, so many of these people, so many of these companies, if only people knew how to talk to each other and deal with issues and talk to each other and to create a structure so that conflict didn't happen in the first place or is mitigated, I wouldn't be needed. And, I love a good fight. Don't get me wrong. I'm a litigator. I love a good scrap, but only when it's necessary. It's almost like, as martial artists, we like a good fight, but only if it's done in a safe fashion, only when it's absolutely necessary. If it's a real fight, God forbid. That was kind of my thinking at the time. Do you recall sort of what your thoughts were what your reaction was when I was sharing these thoughts with you?
Yeah, well, I guess, to take things further back, I mean, you and I have discussed various aspects of conflict throughout our entire friendship, right? Back
Mhm.
in 2002, looking at things from, various kind of martial perspectives. And then, as we've gone on, and we've discussed things from a lot of aspects of like de-escalating conflict or, navigating, resolving conflicts in various ways. Um, yes, I think that there's actually a rich history there. And I think the discussion that you're referring to in particular, I think probably I was bringing up some examples of clients in relationships doing relationship therapy and some of the communication challenges that come about and, similar maybe frustrations there where it's like, just as you were saying, like I would love to live in a world where my services are not necessary, right? I'd love to put myself out of work. And I think if people had the skills to be able to communicate well, to understand themselves, understand one another, and really resolve conflicts. Conflict itself is unavoidable. There's always going to be conflict arising, and if we have the tools and strategies to resolve it well, then conflict can in fact be a golden opportunity to improve people's lives, improve relationships. So I guess I was frustrated with the lack of skill set that people had access to, and the unnecessary conflict, as you said.
Yeah, and some conflict can be beneficial in terms of, let's say competition, a fun competition between divisions in a company. To, whoever gets the most sales in a certain period of time gets a trip to Maui or something like that. Maybe that's a little excessive. I don't know too many companies that are taking their employees to Maui, but you get the drift.
These days.
Yeah, especially these days. And that's really interesting that you brought up all the other discussion we've had about conflict over the years and conflict resolution and the martial arts background as well. Because I remember when we started talking more seriously about maybe starting a venture together to start helping reduce the amount of conflict in the world in business and in organizations and what have you, that the principles of conflict are the same regardless of the context. And I was dealing more with businesses and government entities in my law practice. You were dealing with a lot of the sort of more interpersonal, relational issues in your psychotherapy practice. My father, as a psychiatrist, certainly has been doing a lot of that work as well over the years. He actually also worked for school boards. He's done work for school boards and other things, so he has that institutional orientation as well. So he's got a nice blend between my background and your background, I suppose. But that's something that really struck me as being very important, and that's why I think also my military background and my father's military background. For those who don't know, my father served in the Army Reserve as well when he was younger. He's a little bit past retirement age now. That these principles apply regardless of the context that we're talking about, or that may be existing for a particular issue. So, if I can ask you, in fact, you and I have had so many practical discussions about this, and obviously we're aligned so much. But I don't know if I've ever asked you flat out, what's your motivation, your underlying motivation for creating Pacificus?
Hmm. All right. Well, I think that it is really. I mean, I guess it sounds somewhat trite to say that it's captured in our tagline there to make a more peaceful world, right? And that is the goal here. So when I was growing up, my mother used to say that I was always the peacemaker. And so I would always I really enjoyed some stories from the Bible about Jesus walking on the water saying, "Peace be still." And so I used to love that idea. And um, I've always loved the idea of resolving conflict, of helping people to bridge their differences and improve their relationships. And so this coupled with those discussions that we were just having, where it's like, if people, I think part of that was thinking like, wow, like we should really be teaching these skills to young children, to elementary school, high school, all throughout one's lifespan. One should be honing these skills. And so I think we started thinking like, how can we contribute in some way to that process?
Mm.
And I really think that if more people had a better handle, a better toolbox for addressing conflicts, the world would be an infinitely better place. The fact that we find ourselves squabbling over, petty differences leads to so much like suffering in the world. So if we can do our small part to help change that, to make a more peaceful world, um, not only would I find that personally gratifying, moreover, I think we would just be improving the world dramatically.
So much of what we do in our motivations, I think we could easily label corny. Uh, it's, I want to make the world a better place, but I think that it takes on a different meaning when you have the experiences you and I have. The things that I know you've seen that we've discussed in your social work history, and the problems that your patients have faced in your psychotherapy practice. And then, of course, in my law practice, I have to say that, running my own law firm, building up my own law firm from nothing was a formative experience for me, because it really taught me about just how difficult it is to create a positive, thriving business and to sustain it when you're dealing with market forces, when you're dealing with severe government regulation, when you're dealing with the travails of life, and maintaining that, and especially when you have employees who are counting on you to keep them fed and keep a roof over their families' heads. It's a tremendous amount of pressure. It's tremendously difficult, and that certainly I share a lot of your motivations as well. But for me, a big part of it as well is that business background, and one of the reasons I was so passionate about helping businesses as a lawyer, and I'm so passionate about helping businesses with this issue. And when we talk to prospective clients, we lay out all those statistics about how many hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, it costs the economy every year, workplace conflict. And I think to myself, I would hate for a business to fail simply because, let's say, the founders didn't know how to talk to each other and resolve a problem, or an employee wound up feeling harassed because of the way people talk to them. They sue the company, huge litigation issue, huge PR fallout. These sorts of things can cripple companies, even large ones. And it's so frustrating to me when I see these things happen when they can be prevented. So that's a huge part of my motivation, that I have so much respect and admiration for my fellow entrepreneurs and for people who are managing and running businesses, because it's a lot harder than a lot of people realize. And
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in on that point again. So I was part of the creation of, I guess, a psychotherapy clinic. They're kind of at the beginning of it, and I wasn't like a founder, but I was there from the beginning. And seeing how challenging it is to create a workplace culture that's positive, cohesive, that builds, camaraderie. It's so challenging, even on a small scale. Never mind when you get larger and larger organizations with all of the associated layers of bureaucracy and so on. And I know many organizations I've worked for over the years. There's this almost animosity between different facets or factions even within the organization. And again, it comes down to these things, right? How are we resolving these conflicts on both a micro level, interpersonal level, and on these, larger, let's say, intra-organizational levels, and then also externally inter-organizational levels. So, yeah, I think there's many ways that we can be helpful.
there are lots of layers to it, and that's why I'm so happy that we took the approach we did to create this more holistic turnkey solution for our clients, where we have the courses and the coaching, sure, but we also have that consulting where we can really assess the structural issues that may exist in a company, or how we can help them create structures internal to the business, how we can affect positive cultural change and cultural development. I know that's a huge part of how businesses are looking at issues now in terms of creating new cultures in the workplace. And as we all know, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if you don't have that culture sorted out, good luck to you with any of your, the best laid plans of mice and men, as they say. So, that's some of I think, our backgrounds and our underlying motivations. But something I wanted to pick your brain about was our values as a business. And one of our core values as a business is resiliency. And I just was wondering if maybe you could share some of your thoughts so that our listeners, our viewers, can maybe hear where you're coming from that. And then I'll chime in with my thoughts.
So, yeah, I mean, resilience is a rich topic. There's lots to discuss there. How does this apply to conflict resolution in particular? I think there's a number of different ways. One that's been on my mind recently with a challenging relationship I had, a challenging situation I had in a friendship of mine. And it really struck me that it's difficult to reach resolution with a person if they are struggling to regulate their own emotions, if they're not in a place at that moment of resilience. And so of course that applies to ourselves as well. If we're not able to the word resilience means to spring back, right? So if we don't have that flexibility, it's a blend, a balance between flexibility and strength. Where on the one hand, if we go too far in the direction of strength, we'll get rigid, and there's a fragility there, where a brittleness perhaps that can lead to a person being broken. Whereas if we go too far in the flexibility direction, then we end up having no boundaries. And I know that from experience because, when I went through burnout, in large part, that was because I was saying yes to everyone and not really taking care of myself, and therefore not being resilient. There's a quote by Brene Brown who says that the people who are the most generous have the best boundaries. Mm. So I think that's an important part of resilience, which is a hard-won lesson for me to understand that. In any event, so I think that in order to engage well in a conflict resolution process, one needs to have the grit, if you will, the resilience to persevere in the face of quite challenging circumstances sometimes. Again, everything has layers of nuance here, and anyway, perhaps we'll leave it there for the moment, and hear some of your thoughts.
Well, I agree with everything you said. Surprise, surprise. It seems like for some reason you and I are on the same page about just about everything, which is why we're doing this work together. One of my motivations for starting this business actually is intrinsically tied to the issue of resilience. And my background, my parents are both refugees from Central Europe, from communist regimes. They escaped from communist regimes. My father remembers tanks being in the streets in Budapest in 1956 as a young teenager, and having to escape across the Hungarian countryside in ski boots in the middle of winter with his brother and parents to escape communism. And thank God they made it to Canada. And growing up on those stories, it always amazed me how fortunate I am, how fortunate all of us are to live in a free country, say with safety and security. And I think that there have been some wonderful developments over the last 20, 30 years in our society, in Western society, where we prize the individual, and each of us has our own unique contributions that we can make to our culture and our society and our country. But I think there's a downside to that. I think that maybe the pendulum has swung so far in that direction that a lot of people react very vociferously to things that rub them the wrong way. And you hear the discourse in society these days where you've got two sides where one side calls the other snowflakes, and the other side calls the other side any number of names, like, at the very least, they call them insensitive. They use a bunch of isms as well these days. And, both sides, I think, are correct on certain things, and both sides miss the script on certain things, I think. And it's lonely being somewhat in the center, as, you and I have discussed when sort of thinking about how these issues tie into the workplace for our clients, because our clients have to navigate this with their workforce, right? Especially when you get the intergenerational workforces where you've got Gen Z, Gen X, Gen Y, you have the millennial component, et cetera. So I feel like, sorry, I could go on for hours about this topic, and I feel like I may be going down the rabbit hole here, but resilience, basically the ability to, even if someone says something that rubs you the wrong way, instead of going down your own rabbit hole, regardless of what it is, and be able to bounce back, as you put it. I think that's just a wonderful phrase for it. To bounce back and give people the benefit of the doubt in your team, in your organization, and to, I think, perspectives that are intrinsically egocentric, that are self-centered, that are all about the individual me, can be very unhelpful. And so I think part of what we strive to do as a company when we talk about resilience is getting people to take a step back, take a step outside of your own feelings about something, which doesn't mean your feelings aren't legitimate. Of course they're legitimate. They're how you feel about something. And you could be right, so to speak, about the harm that someone has caused. But at the same time, if we're going to talk about constructive ways of dealing with problems, preventing problems from being exacerbated, I think we have to be resilient. We have to be able to bounce back and address something in a positive fashion. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that people have to be in the right frame of mind. They can't be emotionally compromised. Otherwise, good luck to you. I know my father has frequently advised his patients over the years, look, if you are upset, that is not the time to try to resolve a conflict. It doesn't end well. So, yeah, sorry, I'm worried I may have
I think
touched too much upon some of the other core issues, because you and I are both very passionate about all the interrelated aspects of these things.
Everything we touch on has so many layers of nuance. While you were speaking, I was thinking about there's a axiom, if you will, a maxim, maybe a piece of advice that says, assume positive intent. And I think there's a lot of merits to that. I think at the same time, there's some times when maybe that's unhelpful as well, right? So it's like everything that we look at, there's multiple perspectives, there's shades of gray, there's nuance to it. Anyway, so I think that it's very helpful to try to dig through some of those layers and see things from those multiple different perspectives.
Absolutely. And something else that occurred to me when I think about resilience, but I also think about what you talked about regarding your motivation for joining me in this venture, is that all the things that we teach our clients, employees, all these courses and what we teach the management of a company, we tell everybody, these skills don't need to go in the mental closet when you punch out for the day and go home.
Yeah.
Right. These are skills that you can apply. And it goes back to what we talked about before about context. These are skills that you can apply, with your spouse, with your kids, with your parents, with your friends. These are not business specific skills. These are people specific skills. And that's a great phrase, actually. We should probably make sure we get some IP protection on that. I like that. People specific skills. So I'll talk to the legal team about that. But in any event, I think we've been yammering on about ourselves and our values for quite a while now. And folks, to all of you who have tuned in and are watching, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that listening to Laval and I gave you some better perspective about who we are as people, who we are as business owners, where we're coming from, and what sort of organization Pacificus is, because we are very passionate about resolving workplace conflict and teaching all of you these wonderful skills so that you can improve not just your work life, but also your personal lives. Well, for everyone who is joining us for the first time, we are the Pacificus Group. We are specialists in teaching workplace conflict resolution skills. You can find us online at www.pacificus.group. That's word Pacific like the ocean with a US at the end. And please feel free to reach out to us anytime. We would love to talk to you. Have a great day. And Laval, thank you for your time, my friend.
Likewise.
Take care.